Okay, ladies, gentlemen, and programmers, we're going to learn how to spawn enemies using a prefab. Okay, so we need to spawn an enemy as soon as another one dies, and we can do this using a prefab. So write these variables down, or write these notes down. So you need to know what an asset is, and you need to know what a prefab is. Okay, so write that down. Okay, so this is not only a new vocabulary word, but this is also going to be some in the code that we're going to write later. So to instantiate is the act of creating an instance of a class or a prefab. So in this case, so right here I've already done this. I've made my prefab. When I grab this guy and stick him into the scene and put him in the scene, or I write code that puts him into the scene, it goes from here's instructions on how to make an enemy to okay, I actually have an enemy in the scene that's walking around. So this is a prefab or an asset, and this is the actual instance of it. When I do that, I instantiate it. Okay, so it's taking a class and putting it into the scene. Okay, so normally the first step in creating a prefab is to create the game object, add scripts and components. Okay, but you've already done this because you've already created your enemy. So we're going to go right down to step 2. So we're going to drag the object down from the hierarchy view and drop it in the project view. So we're going to go over here. Here's your enemy. You're going to drag him down into the project view over here, and then he's going to appear right here. Okay, and so now you notice that now his text is blue, indicating that this guy is also down here. Okay, write this down as well. Okay, so so now we're going to continue to work on the prefab. Since you're going to spawn the enemy from now on, we can delete the enemy from the scene. So we don't need him to be here already, right? We're gonna use code to spawn him. So we're gonna right click and we're going to delete our enemy. Okay. All right. Next. Okay. So the enemy is no longer in the scene. So he's not there. So he can't do anything. He can't spawn himself. So the question is, how can we spawn the enemy? What are we gonna do? So see if you can figure out in the notes how to do this, and see if you can try to figure out how to get him spawned. Okay, so the way we're going to do it is we're going to add an invisible game object and then write the script for this invisible game object, and this invisible guy is going to actually spawn the enemy. So choose game object, create empty. So we're going to come over here, we're going to go game object, create empty. Okay, you're going to name it controller, and you're going to set the position at 0, 0, 0. So he's here, we can't see him. But we can see him over here, and then we're going to write a script for him. We're going to write this controller. Where'd it go? I don't know where it is. It's somewhere in here. So we're going to write some controller script, and then we're going to add it to him. Okay, so rename it controller and set the position to 0, 0, 0, and then create a script called scene controller, and we're going to write the code shown on the next slide, and then eventually we're going to attach it to our empty game object called controller. Okay, so here's the code. You write this code. Okay, so write that code, attach that code to your guy, and see what happens. Okay, so try it and see if it works. Try it and see if it works. And no enemy. What's gone wrong? Let's see what's going on. I'll tell you in a second here. Okay, so you need to attach the prefab to the empty You got to attach the prefab to the empty variable in the inspector. So we have this new special kind of variable. We'll talk about it in a second. But if you click on the controller, you're looking in the inspector. There's no game object there. So you have this empty thing. So it doesn't know who to add to the scene. So if you add that there, all of a sudden you hit play, and there we go. If I kill him, all of a sudden he reappears. So we get him at the beginning, and he appears as soon as he's dead. Okay, so that's good. Now let's break this down. Okay, so look, we have this new thing called a serialized field. Okay, so use a private variable. So this was private, not public. So normally, if they're private, they don't appear in the inspector, but because it's a serialized field, it does. And this is good because we can keep it private. No other scripts can mess around with it, but yet we can still see it in the inspector, and we can add our prefab the way we need. Okay, so let's break this down what this does. So you say, hey, I want to have a box or an instance variable called enemy prefab, and the only kind of thing that can go into it is a game object, and right now it's declared but not initialized. There's nothing in it, but we actually initialized this manually when we dragged our enemy prefab into it, right? So we have a box called enemy prefab that is holding the prefab. Okay, so then down here we have this box called enemy, right? The only thing that can go into this box is a game object, but this right now is empty, right? So we've declared our enemy variable, but it's empty. Okay, so then now we're going to go down to update. This is the part that goes over and over again. Now check this out. If enemy is null, well, it is. We just said it was. We declared it, but we didn't stick anything into it. So what's it going to do? When is this condition true? So when there's no enemy in the world, when there's no enemy in this variable, this is true. And then look what we do. We say, hey, okay, so our enemy's empty. What are we going to do? We're going to instantiate the enemy prefab. So it's going to look inside this as like, oh, okay, we have our enemy prefab in here, right? So we're going to take that guy, we're going to make one, we're going to put it into the scene, and then we have this special keyword here that we're going to talk about later as game object. That's kind of special too. So we're using this new code that we have to actually create an enemy prefab. We're going to actually make a guy in the scene, and the guy in the scene is enemy. So we've got our prefab here. We actually have the guy in the scene here. Okay. Answer all the questions in red, by the way. Either write it down or answer it. Okay. Now look at this. So enemy.transform.position. Okay. So we take, hey, enemy, the guy in the world. We need to transform you. Where we're going to put him at a new vector 3. So you know a vector 3 holds 3 numbers. What are those 3 numbers? 0, 1, 0. So we're going to put them right smack dab in the middle of our scene. And then what are we doing here? We're creating a box called angle, a local variable, not an instance variable. This is called angle. What can go into it? A float, which is a decimal. And what are we doing? We're talking to our random class. We want to make a random number between the range of 0 and 359. So we're going to put a random number in this box called angle, and then eventually we're going to use that angle down here. We're going to say, hey, enemy in the world, we want to transform you and rotate you 0, angle 0. So he's going to rotate around at whatever random angle we just created. Okay, so write that all down. Okay, now let's talk about this as keyword again. So by default, instantiate returns a new object as a generic object, right? But we can't use generic objects in Unity. We can only use game objects. So what we have to do is convert this into a game object. So we use the as keyword as game object. So we say, hey, we want to put something in our box called enemy. We're going to instantiate our enemy prefab. We're going to convert him to a game object, and then we're going to stick them in this box. Okay, so write all this down. Here's the general formula whenever you want to change, you want to typecast. Did I say that? It's called typecasting. When you change one object to another type of object, that's called typecasting. Here's how you do it. The original object as, there's your as keyword, new type. All right, that's it for now. In the next episode, we're going to also work with prefabs. We're going to make a fireball projectile for the enemy.